It's also sweet that even in the middle of the biggest sex scandal in the history of the American presidency, he takes precious time on the toilet to post about our show. Keep saying we have bad ratings, and you should listen to him, because if anyone knows about bad ratings, it's that guy.
I asked President Xi if they had a problem in China, but he said, no, me no like does better with the voice, I think I must say.
China, president of China.
What starts as a few harmless laughs on a late-night show quickly turns into something much bigger, with the spotlight landing on one of America's most talked-about marriages. The jokes get sharper, the smiles become more telling, and somewhere between the punchlines and the teasing, some genuinely uncomfortable truths begin to surface. Jimmy Kimmel and Alec Baldwin don't just make a few jokes and move on, they flip the whole conversation upside down, and suddenly what seemed like simple comedy feels a lot more revealing. From that point on, everything picks up speed, the tension keeps building, and by the time it's over, no one walks away without feeling the impact.
From the moment Donald and I met, there was an undeniable spark. There was something magnetic about him. His confidence, his charm, his humor, his vision.
The one thing he wasn't lying about was that.
She's the one with the bad temperament. She's always screaming, she's constantly lying, her hair is crazy, her face is completely orange, except around the eyes where it's white. And when she stops talking, her mouth looks like a tiny little butthole.
If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to subscribe, because it really does make a difference. The moment Jimmy Kimmel turned his attention to Donald Trump's marriage, the entire mood in the studio changed. What had felt light and relaxed suddenly became quiet and tense in an instant. There was no yelling or dramatic confrontation, just Kimmel's calm, sharp delivery that made it clear something much bigger was about to unfold. It was the kind of silence that...
6 months when they're indicted for crypto fraud, he'll say he never met them. Uncle Scam also treated the gathered crowd to a fairy tale about how low the price of food is now since he took office.
Walmart announced that the cost of their standard Thanksgiving meal is 25% lower. The price of Thanksgiving turkey is down 33% from its Biden-era highs. Potatoes are down 13%, and gasoline will soon be hovering around $2 a gallon.
Yeah. Just like your weight is hovering around 170.
The jokes came across like simple, harmless observations at first, but every single one landed with incredible precision, as if they were aimed at places everyone already knew were sensitive. Trump's marriage, which had spent years surrounded by polished photos and carefully staged public moments, was no longer being treated like a picture-perfect love story. Instead, it started to feel...
As is tradition, except for 4 years ago when Trump refused to do it, the outgoing first couple welcomed the incoming president and first lady, which was interesting to watch. Trump actually got involved in Melania's outfit for this ceremony. A lot of people are talking about it. He told her he thought it would be super hot if she dressed like a goth Al Capone. And so she did. We found Carmen Sandiego.
Jimmy Kimmel never had to make direct accusations. He simply held up a mirror and let the timing do all the work. He pointed to the stiff hand-holding, the constant smiles, and the way every affectionate moment always seemed to appear right when political pressure was building. It started to look less like genuine romance and more like something carefully planned, with every display of unity arriving exactly on cue. The audience laughed at first because the jokes were funny, but as the moment unfolded, many began to realize there was a deeper point behind the laughter.
I have honestly lost count now of how many times the president has demanded I be pulled off the air. I mean, talk about a snowflake, this guy. Every 5 weeks, he flips out and wants me fired. If you got this many threats from a neighbor, you'd have no problem getting a restraining order. The judge would be like, yeah, it sounds like the guy's nuts. Boom. It's disturbing. You know, and you've done this before. You tried to get me fired in September. It didn't work, Mr. President. I admire your tenacity. If you're watching tonight, which I presume you are, how about this? I'll go when you go.
Once you start looking at a relationship as choreography instead of chemistry, everything changes. The affection begins to feel carefully staged. The closeness seems more like an obligation than a real connection. And even the smiles can look polished enough to impress everyone while revealing very little underneath. That was Jimmy Kimmel's real strength. He never came across as if he was attacking anyone. Instead, he sounded genuinely curious, and that quiet approach slowly unraveled a story that had been carefully polished for years. He looked back at their public appearances one by one, noticing how they always seemed together when the cameras were rolling, yet somehow never shared the same energy. It gave the impression of two people sharing headlines without sharing the same emotional space. Then Alec Baldwin joined in, taking a different approach. His satire was sharp, but it wasn't built on exaggeration. He simply reflected what many people had already noticed, drawing attention to the
My wife will tell you, I never imitated him or had anything to do with. Lauren called me and said, "You want to do this?" And I go, "No, I don't want to be Trump on TV." And because anytime you have any kind of mimicry, it's usually somebody that you appreciate. You have some appreciation.
Right.
So they said to me, "Trump," and I didn't hate Trump. I just said, I don't want to do that. And Tina and Lauren kind of pushed me, and I do it. And you've seen SNL. And the moment the stage manager takes me to my mark for the first dress rehearsal at 8 o'clock, I had no idea what I was going to do.
Really?
I mean, literally, the moment I walked out, I just said to myself, eyebrow up. I tried to stick my face out, my mouth out. I was in the makeup room. They're putting my wig on, and it was like a scene from like a mental hospital.
What made it so interesting was that Jimmy Kimmel and Alec Baldwin arrived at the same point, without ever seeming to coordinate. Kimmel exposed the pattern through timing, while Baldwin highlighted it through satire. They used completely different styles, but the result felt remarkably similar. The marriage stopped looking like a spontaneous romance and started looking carefully managed. With every laugh, the audience seemed to recognize something that felt strangely familiar. It was the kind of realization that comes when humor suddenly connects to something people have seen before. The couples who always look perfect on social media, who never argue in public.
I'd like to start by answering the question that's on everyone's mind. Yes, this is real life. This is really happening. On January 20th, I, Donald J. Trump, will become the 45th President of the United States. And then 2 months later, Mike Pence will become the 46th. I am so excited to live in the White House. I'm even going to have a little pet, like all the presidents do. Bill Clinton had socks, Barack Obama had Bo, and I'll have Paul Ryan. I mean, I'm not gay, but I cannot wait to give it to that man for free.
And that's the part that really landed. Because there's something unsettling about the idea that a relationship might survive more for appearances than for genuine connection. Instead of feeling like a place of comfort or a shared emotional bond, it starts to look like a carefully maintained public image designed to withstand pressure. Jimmy Kimmel pointed to how rarely truly spontaneous warmth seemed to show up between them, and how even their unscripted moments often felt slightly out of sync, as if they were together physically, but emotionally somewhere else. Alec Baldwin focused on a different angle, drawing attention to the imbalance that many people believed was already visible beneath the surface. What made their commentary so effective was that it didn't rely on hidden information or dramatic revelations. Everything they referenced had already played out in public through interviews, photos, awkward moments, and carefully staged appearances. The comedy didn't reveal new secrets, it simply connected familiar moments in a way that made people see them differently. By the end, the fairy tale wasn't dramatically torn apart. It had simply been quietly
Gosling and Jennifer Lawrence, they will all be at my inauguration.
As the satire went on, the jokes stopped focusing on the obvious and started digging into what seemed to be underneath it all. The point wasn't that affection had simply faded, it was that the affection now appeared to serve a different purpose. Instead of looking like a private, personal bond, the marriage was portrayed as something that helped manage public perception, absorb criticism, and project stability. People laughed because the jokes were clever, but the silence that followed suggested they also recognized the deeper point being made. Jimmy Kimmel's calm delivery made the observations sound almost
The mass deportations Trump promised are underway. Large-scale raids on undocumented immigrants started today, which means Melania is hiding in her bedroom for 2 reasons now. Yesterday, the president signed an order to lift all government DEI requirements and to put all federal employees who are working on DEI-related initiatives on immediate leave. Donald Trump won't be satisfied until his administration is as white as the chiclets his son calls teeth. But he will not tolerate
Jimmy Kimmel kept coming back to one thing over and over again: the timing. He pointed out how public displays of unity always seem to become more noticeable whenever legal troubles or political pressure intensified. His point wasn't necessarily that the affection was fake, but that it often appeared carefully timed. And once people start noticing that pattern, it becomes difficult to see those moments as completely natural. The audience wasn't laughing because the marriage looked like it was falling apart. They were laughing because it seemed carefully managed, and those are 2 very different things. A broken relationship falls apart on its own, while a managed one can continue looking stable long after the connection has changed. As the monologues and performances spread online, the conversation slowly shifted beyond comedy. More people began treating the relationship less as a private love story and more as a public symbol tied to a larger image. Kimmel's jokes painted it as a carefully choreographed routine, while Alec Baldwin's satire emphasized power, performance, and public image. Even though they approached it differently, both arrived at the same interpretation, portraying the relationship as something that looked less like a traditional marriage and more like a practical partnership built to be maintained in public.
Gee, I said, you have a drug problem. No. We give death penalty to people that sell drugs. End of problem.
So I'm going to sign these papers for emergency, and then I'll immediately be sued, and the ruling will not go in my favor, and then I'll end up in the Supreme Court, and then I'll call my buddy Kavanaugh, and I'll say it's time to repay the Donnie, and he'll say, new phone, who dis?
And we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, and then we'll get another bear.
By the time the laughter faded, the image of a traditional love story had quietly given way to something that felt colder, but far more resilient. The relationship was portrayed as a partnership built to withstand controversy, public scrutiny, and constant attention, rather than one defined by passion alone. The real focus wasn't on heartbreak or betrayal, but on how the relationship seemed to function. Most people will never know the private reality of a famous couple, but they can recognize when something starts to feel more like a system than a spontaneous connection. As the jokes continued, the laughter took on a different meaning, not because the comedy stopped being funny, but because the larger picture had become harder to ignore. It no longer seemed like the story of 2 people simply growing apart over time. Instead, it looked like 2 people settling into public roles so completely that genuine intimacy almost became secondary.
Got their hand up, but they suck, so not them. ABC sucks too, but at least they have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We love the S.H.I.E.L.D., don't we? We love the S.H.I.E.L.D.
Not NBC. I like ABC a little bit more, not much.
Do you feel like enough progress has been made in the talks with China?
Look, you're asking the wrong guy. Because I friggin' love tariffs.
Well, you're talking to the wrong person because I happen to like tariffs.
Chuck Schumer is gonna say, and I'm not gonna do the voice. He'll say something like, oy vey, you know what I'm gonna do the voice? Oy vey, what are you, Michiganer?
Schumer's gonna stand up and say, oh,
Jimmy Kimmel and Alec Baldwin never described the relationship as loveless, and they never accused anyone of deception. Instead, through careful timing, satire, and sharp observation, they suggested that it seemed to operate less like an emotional bond and more like a well-practiced routine. The point wasn't about proving anything behind closed doors, but about highlighting a pattern that many viewers felt they could already see. By the time the final laughs faded, it felt as though the audience had watched the image of a fairy tale marriage slowly transform into something that looked more structured than spontaneous, without any dramatic revelation or shocking scandal. There was no explosive twist, no betrayal, just a gradual realization that the story...
Hey, speaking of prisoners, this should be an interesting Valentine's Day at the White House. For instance, will Donald Trump get flowers from Vladimir Putin? We don't know. And what about his wife, Melania? Will they spend the night together, or will she remain trapped like Rapunzel at their apartment in New York? Do you know Melania Trump has a new line of greeting cards? They carry these now at CVS. They're interesting, actually. I've not seen any. Happy Valentine's Day. Open out, saving.
Jimmy Kimmel's style of humor left the idea sitting quietly in front of the audience, almost like a sealed envelope that no one needed to open, because the message was already clear. Alec Baldwin's more theatrical approach took that same idea and pushed it into the spotlight, making people notice details they might have overlooked before. Together, they painted a picture that felt less chaotic and more unsettling in a different way. A relationship that appeared steady but emotionally distant. It wasn't presented as something on the verge of collapse. Instead, it seemed built to keep going no matter what happened around it. The impression was of a partnership that could absorb criticism, survive constant public attention, and continue operating under pressure because that had become part of its routine. The irony, according to the satire, was that this made the relationship seem almost impossible to shake. Not because it looked deeply romantic, but because it appeared designed to function regardless of emotion. The commentary wasn't about uncovering a hidden scandal or predicting a dramatic breakup. It suggested that the public image would continue much as it always had, with coordinated appearances, familiar photo opportunities, and symbolic moments unfolding on schedule. The difference was that after hearing